All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I live in New York. I have two sons with ARPKD who are 21 and 15. And then I have one in the middle who's 18, just graduated from high school. And they're doing well. And I'm going to be the hospitality host. So just a couple of reminders, mute yourselves, please. And if you have questions, you can type them into the chat. And then we will be addressing questions throughout, but then also questions at the end. And we are going to have, it's kind of going to be a back and forth between the Cormacs and Dr. Hartung. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Hartung. I'm very pleased for our panel today. Dr. Hartung is an attending pediatric nephrologist at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and CHOP, and assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania, Perelman School of Medicine. She also serves as director of the Pediatric Nephrology Fellowship Program and co-director of the Combined Kidney Liver Program at CHOP. Dr. Hartung's clinical and research focuses PKD, particularly ARPKD. Through studies to better define the natural history of ARPKD and imaging studies to develop new biomarkers of kidney and liver disease progression, her research aims to accelerate the development of new treatments for ARPKD. Dr. Hartung also serves on the PKD Foundation's Science Advisory Committee, the PKD and Children Council, and was the lead author of their ARPKD patient handbook. And we are so pleased. Dr. Hartung has done so much for the PKD Foundation. And not only that, she's just a really nice person. And whenever I email her to ask her questions, she's always very willing to email me back and answer so many of my questions. I wish I lived closer. She's an awesome doctor. And joining Dr. Hartung on our panel are Lisa and Doug Cormac and their daughter, Jana. And do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa, and this is my daughter, Jana, and my husband, Doug. And we would like to take a minute to share our family ARPKD story. Our oldest daughter, Jana, was born a healthy 7 pounds, 12 ounces in July of 2010. She was a beautiful and sweet baby, and we thought she had no physical problems. At 2.5 months, she began to have multiple urinary tract infections and terrible fevers. She was hospitalized several times and had multiple tests done, but the doctors were inconclusive. She seemed to outgrow the infections, but always had multiple unexplained fevers each year. In September of 2012, we had our healthy son, and in May of 2014, our sweet daughter, Chesley.
At Chesley's 2-week checkup, the doctor also performed Jana's preschool physical. During the physical, our pediatrician found a small lump in Jana's abdomen. She was 3 and had no signs of being sick. An ultrasound found her kidneys to be larger than an adult's and fibrosis of her liver as well. She was then clinically diagnosed with autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease and congenital hepatic fibrosis. Her blood pressure was double what a child her age should be, and the left side of her heart was also enlarged. In January of the following year, through genetic testing, the diagnosis was confirmed. Genetic testing also revealed our younger daughter has ARPKD as well. Our son was found to be a carrier of the gene and could pass it on to his own children.
I'm now on 4 blood pressure medications a day, reflux meds, iron which seems to hurt my stomach a bit, tons of other meds, and growth hormone shots. My little sister Chesley takes 1 blood pressure med, reflux meds, and iron each day. We have yearly ultrasounds and MRIs, quarterly blood draws, and lowered immune systems. We both have a team of specialists, including nephrology, GI, cardiology, neurology, endocrinology, dermatology, and in the past, PT and mental health. And we visit the doctor more often than a normal healthy children should. I would like to mention that if any of your children are interested, I am hosting a fun summer Kidney Kids Zoom on Wednesdays this summer. Contact us after the session if you would like more info or would like to join in the fun. Thank you.
So we're going to go over some of the topics for advocating for your child with ARPKD. And Dr. Hartung, when we first learn about this disease, a lot of the information that you get as a parent can seem very grim and negative. And a lot of parents whose children are diagnosed in utero are given a very small chance of survival, even though this may not be true. So what can someone in that situation do to find more answers and proper care during their pregnancy or shortly after birth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of that I think comes from the historical way in which people were taught about ARPKD, and probably even to some extent now. I think a lot of times, even when you go into textbooks, and particularly I think in the OBGYN literature, there is a lot of doom and gloom surrounding ARPKD. And a lot of that comes from the fact that, maybe 15, 20 years ago, all anybody knew about ARPKD were the most severe cases. And we didn't necessarily know as much about kids like Jaina who were diagnosed a little older, or even people who are diagnosed in their teens or sometimes even 20s or later. So I think the best thing, all of you are here connected with the PKD Foundation, which is great. And I think, thankfully nowadays through some of the social media efforts like the PKD Parents chapter and the Facebook group and things like that, it becomes a little easier to find information about the broader spectrum of what to expect. I would also encourage people to look around for the option of getting a prenatal counseling session with a nephrologist. Not every place has that capability, but I know, we do that at CHOP where, we have obviously a very excellent and specialized team of OBGYNs called maternal fetal medicine specialists. But as part of that, we often do prenatal consultations with pregnant moms, and we, talk to the OBGYN. We give some information to the moms about what we're seeing, and try to give some perspective about the range of possibilities to expect. I think the other thing to just remember is that it is very, very difficult to make predictions based on anything you see prenatally. And there are many children who things looked very bad, so to speak, prenatally, even people with very low fluid, and they've been told that story of gloom and doom, and then they turned out to do very well. And that is, I really see that. I think that is something that can cause a lot of trauma to families. I see that even among, I've had patients who recently kind of graduated out of my care and they're off to college, but the parents still hold in their hearts that fear that stems from the fact that when that child was in utero, that they were told that they won't survive. So I think just, looking to outside your direct care team, seeking out family opinions, potentially seeking out prenatal counseling, those things could be helpful.
Well, after our daughters were first diagnosed, we eventually sought out a second opinion just to make sure they were getting the appropriate care. And since diagnosis happens at different stages, do you have any suggestions about how to start getting in touch with doctors who are more familiar with ARPKD? And is there a healthy way to promote the interaction with your existing doctors and the new specialists?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, so first of all, even pediatric nephrology as a specialty in general can be, is a smaller specialty. So depending on where you live, sometimes people are having to travel several hours even to see a general pediatric nephrologist. And then those of us who specialize or have an interest in PKD are even fewer and farther between. But I think the key is really doing your own research and using things like the PKD Foundations. They have a list on their website for PKD centers, many of which are adult centers, but I know, we've contributed our information from CHOP, and some other of the pediatric centers are listed there as well. But also making it an open conversation with your existing pediatric nephrologist. We are quite a small community in pediatric nephrology, and I'm sure it's the same in GI. And I think I think sometimes people feel maybe uncomfortable, or that they're kind of cheating on their doctor by seeking a second opinion. But I don't think any of us in the profession feel that way. I think, especially for people taking care of rare diseases, I think, if I'm taking care of something that is not my direct area of research, I would happily have my patients go and see somebody who really knows a lot about that disease, or, I'm constantly reaching out to colleagues for their advice. And so I think in a lot of ways, as long as you create that open partnership that, and it doesn't mean that you have anything against your pediatric nephrologist, but maybe you want to go and, just get some more information, maybe about bigger picture things or more specialized things or research that your local nephrologist may not be as well versed in. And ideally, that should be a very healthy and open two-way relationship. And I've certainly seen patients in all different kinds of ways. So I've had some patients come to me for a second opinion. Maybe they just come once. They just wanted to kind of, get some of their bigger questions answered, get a little bit more perspective. They're very happy with their local team. And maybe I just see them once and then they go back to their local team and I don't see them again. Sometimes I do have families actually who just come and see me maybe once a year or once every 2 years just to check in. And, from my end, sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing anything because they have a great local team, but I think I think that for that family, it gives them that reassurance that, I came to see somebody who thinks about this disease day in and day out. And it reassures me that my local team is doing everything that they're supposed to be doing. And so I think there's all different ways to do that, but I think just keeping, being open about it and asking your nephrologist for advice can be really helpful.
Yeah, speaking of all the doctors, our daughters have over probably a half a dozen doctors and specialists on their team. And I mean, we have tons of appointments. I'm sure all parents can relate to that in this Zoom call right now. It can be taxing to keep all of their medical care and appointments in order. I know I've even left a daughter at home one time. And, so do you have any suggestions on how to keep their medical plan organized for parents?
I would defer to you actually as really the expert in that realm. I do think depending on your hospital system, there are sometimes resources that different hospitals have. And obviously this is very variable from one place to another. But certainly ask your provider whether they have anyone like a nurse navigator or any sort of system. Like at CHOP, for example, we have a team that is called the complex scheduling team, that if parents are trying to coordinate a lot of different appointments, that that you kind of send appointment requests through that complex scheduling team, and they help families to kind of manage a lot of things. Not all hospitals would have that sort of thing, but I think the other thing I would definitely recommend for people is if your hospital offers like a patient portal, an online patient portal, like we have something called MyChop. I think a lot of health systems have similar things. Definitely sign up for that. I think not just for your own ability to track things in terms of all your appointments are listed in one place, et cetera, but it also often really facilitates communication and allows you to, do things that are helpful to the medical team. For example, if you're trying to coordinate multiple appointments between specialists and you send a message to your doctor saying, oh, I have an endocrinology appointment coming up. They're going to do labs. Do you need any labs at that time? There are things that you as a parent can do and communicate in advance. And these portals make that kind of stuff much easier. And that helps your medical team to kind of coordinate with each other as well. But definitely, again, ask your medical team about these types of coordination things. Like, we really try to, especially if I know that a family is traveling from really far away to come see me. And they might call our office and say, okay, I'm going to be there on such and such date because I have an appointment with this and this specialist. And even though I may not officially have a clinic appointment that day, often I'm able to rearrange my schedule so that I can see the family on the day that they're coming to the hospital, so that they're not having to drive 3 hours another day to come and see me. And obviously, not necessarily everyone's able to do that, but oftentimes the answer you get from the scheduling folks may not be the final word, right? If they say, oh yeah, there's no appointments for another 3 months. Like sometimes, there are things that often happen behind the scenes that we do on our end scheduling wise in order to get people in who really need to be seen.
I know we have a binder for each girl. So we have things through Cleveland Clinic on my chart, but then anything like the research studies that they're in or things like that, we keep track of in our binder, and that seems to be a little helpful. But
yes, the binders are great, and as a physician, I love it when a family comes in with a binder. Especially if it's someone who's been seen in a lot of different places, or even honestly, sometimes if it's somebody who's in our own system, because I think people's medical records, particularly young kids who've been in the health system for a long time, there's a ton of information in the computer system. And so we really rely on families to kind of help us to distill that information to, oh, when was it again that such and such thing happened? And even though I could probably spend 10 minutes and find that in the medical record, families' recollections of things, but also your personal notes and records. And, if you're taking blood pressures at home and your little blood pressure log in your phone or in your binder, those things are incredibly helpful.
Yeah. So at one visit to the ER, an emergency room doctor said something about an ARPKD death statistic in front of Jana. She was 6 years old at the time, and he didn't know anything about her clinical history or being familiar with ARPKD. And it had such a profound effect on her that we had to go speak with a mental health professional. So do you have any recommendations on how to deal with those types of situations?
Oh, wow. I think, yeah, I mean, that sounds very difficult. I think one thing that can be helpful up front, because I think a lot of times physicians aren't as good at proactively navigating what types of conversations to have with what people. So maybe, particularly if you're maybe if you're going to see a second opinion or a new doctor for the first time, that maybe being upfront and saying, we'd like to talk to you with Jana here about some of the medical stuff, but then maybe, is there a time that maybe Jana could go out and play in the waiting room or sit with a nurse somewhere so that we could talk about if there's any other things that you think she shouldn't hear or things like that. I think unfortunately, physicians and medical care providers are human, and sometimes some unfortunate things come out of people's mouths. But I think, as a family, maybe trying to be proactive and trying to at least put that on somebody's radar, that to be careful about what types of things they might say in front of the child.
So, over the years, my sister and I have been part of several research studies, and I was wondering if there are any good resources to find out about current studies in ARPKD that you would recommend.
That is a great question. And yes, you guys really have been quite the champions of doing research, which is awesome. So yes, a few different places. So, I know the PKD Foundation has some information on their website. The other place to look for clinical trial, there's a site called clinicaltrials.gov, which is it's run by the National Institutes of Health, but it actually does cover studies worldwide, actually. So a lot of studies, even if they're based in Australia or Europe or elsewhere, will be listed on clinicaltrials.gov, and so that's something that is searchable by keyword, so for disease or locate, you're able to narrow it down by location, et cetera. And so certainly for ARPKD, and I don't know if we have any families on the line who have children with ADPKD, if you go on there, there's definitely studies going on in all of those areas. That particular website focuses more on clinical trials, meaning most of the time it'll be drug studies on there, but sometimes people will put what are called observational studies. So studies where you're just perhaps taking measurements or trying to learn more about the disease. And then, honestly, Google can be your friend as well. And then actually asking your physician as well. And so often, if you do end up having a second opinion with somebody who is more PKD focused, then, all of us are kind of in tune with what's happening around the country, or even studies that might be coming up that aren't kind of public, that haven't started advertising yet, those types of things. So definitely use your medical team as well.
Another thing is our daughter's school experience has been a little bit different than that of a typically healthy child. So both of our girls have a 504, which is a legal document sharing her medical needs at school. We can share Jana's here. And
there it is.
Right here. So Can everybody see that there?
Can everybody see that? Okay, good.
Yep.
So we put her her name, her teacher, and her grade on this paper, and it goes in the bin in like their sub file. So all the teachers, if they have a substitute teacher, they will see her face first thing in the morning. And just here's some of the things that she has at school: unlimited restroom and water breaks when she needs them, no contact sports. They do a really good job at finding other things for her to do in PE, like be the timekeeper if there's a sport that she's not allowed to play that day. Inform mom or dad if hit in the abdominal area. She does recess inside. I know we have somebody from Australia. You might get really hot out there. I would say sometimes, though, we have recess that's 85, 90 degrees, and she just gets too hot. So
I get to pick a friend, and then we spend the recess inside.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We have the knee pain in here because of her growth hormone shots, but, you know, any terrible pains going on. Water bottle goes with her everywhere. No penalty for absences. She usually carries Purell around in her book bag. And then she can pretty much snack when needed or go and take a nap if she needs. And then the really cool thing before quarantine is that she had been Zooming. Sometimes if she didn't feel well enough or if she was in the hospital, she would Zoom from the hospital into school. So when quarantine started and everyone had to learn how to Zoom, she already knew how. So I'll stop my share here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really great.
Do you have any more suggestions for parents? Maybe for some individual education plans?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I think for those of you who live within the US, remember that both 504 plans and IEPs, schools are legally mandated to have those. And you as a parent are legally entitled to request those. Also remember that probably almost all, I would imagine all pediatric nephrology practices will have a social worker that is often somebody who works, you know, with nephrology patients and can help with these types of things. So, you know, if you're encountering anything, you know, often your physician's office and the social worker affiliated with that office can often help. And then just to kind of touch a little bit on the distinctions between the two. So a 504, as you said, is a medical plan that might say things related to the medical accommodations related to the medical condition. So, you know, and I do these 504 letters all the time, mostly around the things of, you know, they should be allowed to carry their water bottle with them all the time. They should be allowed unlimited bathroom breaks, or sometimes related to PE, as you said, that, you know, they're not allowed to do this activity. But then again, you know, the school is legally mandated to follow that, but sometimes parents do have to be persistent. I mean, depending on what your school system is, how responsive the administrators are, sometimes, you know, you really have to kind of ask and ask and ask again. But remember, this is your legally mandated right. So be persistent and assert your rights. An IEP, or an individualized education plan, is slightly different. So that also is legally mandated, but that's around learning differences. And again, and, you know, not everyone will need that. It all depends, but certainly there are people who have, particularly if you have more advanced kidney disease, where that does interfere with learning, or perhaps if you're having repeated illnesses and having to spend time in the hospital and you're missing school and things like that. And so again, as part of an IEP, you're entitled to get testing done through the school, entitled to have you know, some sort of assessment of what your needs are in different areas, and if needed, have accommodations made so that you're able to reach your educational goals. And those are both things that I think have to be renewed every year. You have to redo this every year, right? Your 504?
Yeah, we have a meeting once a year.
Mm-hmm. And then does your school require the documents to be signed off by your medical team every year, or now that it's in place, are you just on autopilot?
The first year it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I bet maybe states, it might differ by state too.
Yeah, our understanding, or what we've always practiced, was after we set up our initial 504, was that's just the base. We can always add to it, we can amend it, we can, whatever we need to do, we can always meet with them again, and whatever needs to be done, they can kind of adjust.
Yeah.
And I think even though in theory, like private and parochial schools aren't necessarily bound by the same rules, but obviously, sometimes the benefit of those schools are sometimes smaller or more able to accommodate individual situations. So just start that dialogue early with your school administrators.
Okay. So, Jana's most recent lab reports indicated that her kidney function is beginning to decline more rapidly than it had been in the past. So now we are discussing our plan of action for her kidney transplant. Mm-hmm. So is there a good place to learn about that process or to connect with a transplant center, or what do you suggest for that, the next step?
Mm-hmm. So so many pediatric nephrology practices will have, probably all of them have some connection or affiliation with a transplant center. So some of them are part of a transplant center, or some of them will have defined relationships with transplant centers where they consistently refer their patients to. So that's, asking your own doctors is always a good starting point. There are different organizations online. There are national organizations that kind of regulate and govern kidney transplant. So, and they come by all different acronyms. So, UNOS and the Organ Procurement Transplantation Network. But anyway, if you just Google kidney transplant center, liver transplant center, you should be able to find, or pediatric liver transplant or kidney transplant center. I think one of the things to always ask about is a center's experience with pediatric transplants. So there's many, and this differs. The way that transplant programs look can differ from one hospital to another, and that varies by size of center, by whether it's a standalone children's hospital versus a children's hospital that's part of an adult hospital. And so, and so the way things are exactly arranged differs from one hospital to another. But oftentimes what happens, so say if you're at a smaller pediatric nephrology practice where they don't necessarily themselves do transplants there or kind of take care of patients with kidney transplant in the immediate transplant period, they will often have relationships with a transplant center, say in the next big city, a couple of hours away. And often what they'll have is some sort of established pathway of referral where they refer patients to the center. That center does the transplant, maybe manages things for the first 3 to 6 months. And then there's an official kind of hand back process where you then go back into the care of your local nephrologist. And then sometimes people will alternate appointments between their local nephrologist and the transplant center. I saw in the chat someone mentioned telehealth, and actually, these things, at least in the US, are constantly changing and evolving about the rules regarding telehealth. But like at our center, for example, we have many patients who live quite far away, come to CHOP maybe to get their transplant, but then, in between, they're maybe just getting labs done locally. Sometimes they're alternating, every 3 months, one appointment they do it with their local nephrologist, one appointment they do at our transplant center. Or they're getting their labs done locally. And nowadays, being able to do telehealth appointments with our transplant center. And so the exact specifics of how it might work for a given family can vary, depending on where you live and what your local resources are. But I think often the best starting point is your own local team.
Thank you.
Throughout our journey, we have hit plenty of hurdles. We've missed pills. I've had to call the doctor about too many pills. We've missed appointments. We've canceled plans many times because our girls just, sometimes they just don't feel well. And we have found some nonprofits that work with medically fragile children, and their programs have really brought a lot of joy back into our families' lives. 2 wonderful programs we have in the Cleveland area is Flying Horse Farms. It's a Paul Newman camp with Serious Fun Network, so I know that's a really cool thing to look up, the Serious Fun Network. They have camps all over the world. And then another local thing we have is called A Kid Again, where they do special events and things for the medically fragile children. So do you have any suggestions for families on how to cope with the hard parts of having a child with ARPKD?
I mean, part of it I think is like something like what you just said, Jana, right? Like the fact that you're doing this Zoom group with kids who have kidney disease. I think that is so awesome. And I think, because obviously you all are dealing with a rare disease, and I'm sure there's a lot of times that you're feeling really alone, like you're the only person who has this, and probably, you feel like there aren't really other folks around who are dealing with what you're dealing with. But a few things that I would say about that. So first, is that even though the disease you yourself have is rare, there are many, many kids dealing with medical problems all the time. And so what I always tell kids is that, like if I saw you walking down the street, Jana, I would say, oh yeah, there's just a kid, right? And you probably look around at school and just say, oh yeah, that's a bunch of kids, right? But you don't know, like a lot of those kids, like maybe some of them have some, stomach problem or a brain problem or a heart problem or other kinds of things, right? And so I think, remembering that, yes, even though you're having to go through all that stuff and it doesn't feel normal, there's a lot of kids out there who are going through things that are not normal. And, it doesn't make it any more fun, but hopefully it makes you feel like, what, I'm not alone. The other thing, the camp thing actually that you brought up, that's a really great thing. There's actually some really great kidney camps around. So I don't know if there are camps even that can have the ability to do dialysis at a camp, and like, kidney focused camps that are dialysis and transplant focused. We at CHOP have a cooking camp design. One of my colleagues partnered with the local restaurant school, and they have a cooking camp that's just for kids with kidney disease. And so again, the social workers at your hospital may be able to have some access to those resources. Or if you just, again, just Google camps for kids with kidney disease. Or things like, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, our patients, and I think you guys mentioned that you were looking into that as well. We've had our patients do some really great and memorable trips with them. So I think there's a lot of organizations out there doing some really great work so that people don't feel as alone and that kids get to be kids and have fun, right?
Yeah. Jana just got her wish. The wish was approved, so now she has to decide what she's going to wish for.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure. Have you thought about it?
Some of the options, I think my top one right now is Hawaii.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Do you need a doctor to go with you?
We would gladly take you.
We might need a whole team, so.
Oh yeah, all right. Keep me posted. Actually, just before we move on from transplant, because I don't remember if we were planning to have any more discussion about that. But one thing I just wanted to bring up, actually, and because especially for those of you who have kids with ARPKD, you're in this unique situation. Well, not really completely unique, but this situation of having both kidney and liver disease to deal with. And I think one of the questions that can come up is, if you are heading towards kidney transplant, really getting a sense of, what's the status of your liver, and is that causing problems? Is there any chance that might need to be paid attention to, or have anything differently done? It's much more unusual, but there are some people who end up needing a combined kidney and liver transplant. But bringing that question up early in the course of, as you're starting to head down that transplant path, to really think about so that planning all goes forward, and that the teams are talking to each other and really making that plan. And certainly, there's a lot of times where we will get contacted, and we sometimes will see families who they've been referred to ask, oh, my child needs a kidney transplant. Will they often need a liver transplant? And a lot of times the answer is no, but at least that gives you that reassurance that you're kind of going down the path that you need to be.
I think that those were all the questions that you had on your list, correct? All your topics?
Yep.
Okay, so if people want to start typing in questions into the chat, feel free. I haven't seen any questions yet, but of course I have one. So my big one right now is transition to adult care. And within transitioning to adult care, when do you start that And how do you, as a parent, how do you kind of remove yourself and feel that you should or shouldn't be as involved? And what do they need to bring, like all their paperwork from their whole life, or?
That is a great question. So ideally transition, so I'll make a distinction actually between the word transition and transfer. So transfer is, I've had my last appointment with my pediatric doctor, and now I'm going to my adult doctor, and I'm done seeing my pediatric doctor. Transition actually should be a process. And so really, when people there's actually an entire field of medical literature around this for how to do transition well. But ideally, that should be a process that actually starts at age 12, 13, 14. And it's a whole series of things. It's you as parents starting to gradually give more responsibility to the child in a developmentally appropriate ways. So everything from starting to talk to the child, making sure the child has the vocabulary to be able to explain what their disease is. I mean, Jana, you're far ahead than a lot of people, but I meet a lot of people who are maybe 8 years older than you are, and they're teenagers, and they can't really understand what their disease is. They might not even know what their medicines are. So those types of things, like really kind of getting the kid to take ownership of knowing what their disease is, knowing what their medications are, starting to learn their doses, taking more responsibility for being the person who takes the medicines each day. And then as they get older, say they're getting to age 16, age 17, starting to maybe have, maybe with you as the parent next to them, having them be the person who calls the pharmacy for refills, maybe having them be the person who calls the doctor's office and talks to the nurse to describe some problem. Because I think, obviously I'm a parent too. I know what it's like to, want to, be the good mom and take care of everything. But, ultimately a lot of times you end up doing your child a disservice by hovering too much. Right. And so I think, and so that whole thing, and ideally, your pediatric nephrologist should be part of that conversation, throughout the kind of preteen to teen years. The actual kind of getting closer to the time and starting to think about the actual transfer to the adult center. I think a couple of things to think about are kind of location. So at our center, we transition people at anywhere from age 18 to 22. And when exactly in that spectrum we do it depends a lot on where that child is in their life and what they're going to be doing with their lives. So for example, if it's a kid who's about to graduate from high school, maybe they're going away for college, but they're going to be coming home to visit every spring break, every winter break, and their disease is pretty mild. They really only need labs every few months. And they're not quite ready. And then beyond that, they don't know where they're going to end up after that. So they don't want to commit to finding a whole new team that's nearer to where they're going to college. So I might continue to follow that patient in my pediatric practice throughout their college life, because I can, arrange it so that when they're home for spring break, home for the summer, we can get their appointments in, get their labs in. There are other times where, maybe that graduation from high school is a good time to transition. The other thing also is sometimes the transplant thing will factor into the transition decision. So if somebody is approaching the need for transplant around the time where they're turning 18, often it is better to start that transplant workup at the adult center so that you don't go through the whole transplant evaluation process at your pediatric center and then have to switch midway. It can be done, but you can always, that can be a discussion between you and your doctors for what's ideal. And then, communication is key, and good transfer of information is key. Like you said, Michelle, that, do I take everything for, 18 years of medical records and show up with giant boxes? I mean, thankfully nowadays with electronic medical records, some of this is becoming easier. There are medical record systems that talk to each other. So, for us, for example, like Penn, the adult hospital next to CHOP, is a completely different entity. But we are able to see some limited versions of their medical records, and they can see ours. So when I've transferred patients to them, they will have that information on hand. And then ideally, if your nephrologist can have a conversation or send a email summary or some sort of summary to the adult doctor, that's very helpful. because I think, when we take on a new patient and there's a ton of information to sift through, often the very most helpful thing can be a brief conversation from the person who's transferring that patient to me. Or if not that, then at least a well-written and comprehensive, like the last clinic note, if it has enough information about all their, history, current medications, and what the plans and outlook is.
Interesting. Okay, perfect. Great answer. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think it's about time anyway. If anyone else has questions, go ahead and type them in. I will just make a couple of announcements while we're doing that. Before you leave the session, there will be a survey, and they'll put the link in the notes. So don't forget to, in the chat session, so don't forget to fill that out. But up next, there will be a mindfulness break. Thanks again for joining us. During the break, grab some lunch or a snack. Take the opportunity to visit our exhibits. When you're ready, you'll need to leave our Zoom breakout and navigate back to our virtual platform homepage. You will find our exhibits by clicking on the exhibitor button or the link at the top of the homepage. Our next session is genetics. Well, I don't think that's for us. Maybe. Our next session is genetics, how your genes impact your family tree. The session begins at 1 o'clock Central Time. I know for PKD, for AR PKD, there's at 2:30 or 1:30 Central Time is the liver CHF. And question, Jana, what is the kids Zoom session you were talking about?
So I think it would be best, Tracy, if you want to email me at my email address, and I can just send you out the Zoom link. But it might be kind of hard since you're in Australia, but we record them. So we could, we're going to interview she's, how old is she? I think she's 20 years old. Has ARPKD. And so the kids are going to come up with questions that they want to ask her, and then they're going to interview her on the Zoom soon. And then we do some other fun things, like you guys did
we did drawing class. Mm-hmm. We did some pet questions.
They shared their pets one week. So I could even send you the recordings if it's going to be something like that. So you could email us. I think that would be best.
And why don't you type in your email address into the chat real quick, Lisa? And then also anyone who's on the call, we have a really good Facebook group, parents, PKD and children parents group, where we have a lot of information. You can also connect that way with other parents.
Yeah, we had that last slide actually with resources, right? I don't know if you have that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hartung and the Cormack family, and Jana especially. I think your questions were perfect and the answers were great, and I really appreciate it. It's always so nice to see a face like Jana's, and loved having you here, Jana. Thank you.
She's definitely the cutest person on this Zoom. So no offense to the rest of you. Yeah, thank you. It was great to see you. And hopefully we'll be able to get back to doing this in person, because I think one of the most fun things for me is to get to, meet families and hear from all of you. And I think as a final kind of plug, I think just, talk to your doctors about what it's like to live as a family, right? Because I think that's where we learn so much from you. You're the ones going through this. And I think it's, so hopefully in future years, we'll be able to see each other in person. We'll get to have some more fun together.
Thank you, Dr. Hartung.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.